Hello, hey there. Authentic K blog here. June is, as you may well know or not know, LGBT plus History Month. So it is the month where majority of the LGBT plus Pride taking place. Although here in the UK they start in April and go all the way on until September, because near enough every large town, definitely every city, but every large town in the UK now has an LGBT Pride event, which is absolutely amazing and fantastic. And I'm not going to justify why we have Pride, because I've already done a video on that. I'm going to talk about being LGBT plus and being a care experienced person and growing up in the care system being LGBT plus. In my last employment, I did a massive health survey on care experienced people, and 14% identified as LGBT plus, which is twice the number that Stonewall think is prevalent in the UK. So if you agreed figure, it's about 7% of people in the UK are LGBT plus, and it was 14%. Now, I've also run or set up 3 LGBT youth groups as well, and in all of my youth groups I've run or managed or set up, we had at least 1 or 2 people who were in the care system, either fostered or in children's homes. Now, 1% of the population are care experienced, and there weren't 100 young people in the youth group, so there's definitely a higher prevalence of LGBT young people in the care system. And sadly, if you go to Albert Kennedy Trust or ask any of the youth charities, a good percentage of them are in care because they are LGBT, and either their family kicked them out or the environment was so toxic they could no longer be safe in there. So the people who are care experienced and LGBT plus, as you can imagine, they are a vulnerable minority within a vulnerable minority. So there are many issues that are prevalent and need to be taken into account in regards to that. So one is coming out. So they need, young people who are LGBT plus in the care system feel they need to come out in more places than they would if they were at home with mum and dad. So, they come across more professionals and more adults in their life than they would do if they were not in the care system. They're also very, very worried that their foster carers or the staff in the children's home will treat them differently, or perhaps kind of say to them, well, you're gay because, you're not really gay, you just think you are because you're in the care system and, you've had problems with your parents, I know when I used to do my training in one of my other jobs, this psychologist who was part of the mental health trust, and I actually put a complaint in about them, and other people in the session also put in a complaint on my behalf as well. Basically, when I told him I grew up in care, he was like, oh, did you have a bad experience with your father? Was your mother absent? All this, and maybe that's why you're gay, because you didn't get this role, and you didn't get that role in your life, and all of that. And he really kind of interrogated me, as want of a better word. And young people fear that they will be interrogated about their sexual orientation and or gender identity in regards to them being in care, and maybe that's why. And they're confused in all of this. There's a whole lot of issues and attitudes. In fact, the University of East Anglia did a research only in foster placements, but the young people there were all were all saying that, their main fear was being rejected in their placement, and also whether or not their family would accept them. Because don't forget, they might still have access to their family and still have a relationship with their parents. They also experience a lot of heteronormative assumptions, so by this I mean, the LGBT plus, and they are being asked heteronormative questions. So if it's a young man, do you have a girlfriend? If it's a young girl, young woman, do you have a boyfriend? Um, you know, cisgender perceptions around their gender identity, the fact that they might be gender fluid, and people are like, well, you were a boy last week, I don't understand you're a girl this week, what's this all about, what's going on, I can't understand it, and even around the tea issue, a lot of assumptions that it's because they are in care, it's because of trauma, it's because of abuse, that is why their gender they're assigned at birth is not the gender they feel they are, or they feel they're gender fluid, or they feel they're gender non-conforming. A lot of foster parents struggle to get their heads around these ideas, so they're not quite sure how to deal with it. Again, there's issues around and a lot of adults coming into the life, a lot of professionals being suddenly brought in, and the situation being over-analysed and over-examined, rather than the young person just being allowed to explore that on their own, allowed to go on their own journey. The journey is often prescribed and directed into a certain direction, rather than the young person being able to explore it themselves and being allowed to do that in a safe environment and be guided rather than directed, and supported as well. So it's all about them and their needs, not the needs of the professionals, because often it's about the needs of the professionals, not the young person's needs, I've heard of some awful examples of staff and carers not using the chosen pronouns or the preferred pronouns. One case of the refusal to change files, so using the dead name all the time, and the young person saying that's not my name anymore, it's this, and I want my care file changed, and I want all of the reported instances of my dead name redacted and a new name put in place, and that was refused, quite likely because it was just too much effort, Around HIV awareness as well, there's an assumption that if you say young gay and bisexual men are more at risk of HIV, you're being homophobic. You're not. Okay, so the last time I looked, and it hasn't changed drastically since then, 1 in 600 of the general population have HIV. The rates of HIV amongst gay and bisexual men is between 1 in 8 and 1 in 12, depending on where you are in the country, geographically. Okay, so 1 in 8 or 12 is a lot more than 1 in 600. So if you are giving heteronormative sexual health messages and HIV prevention messages to young gay and bisexual men, it's not going to work. You need to be given specific messages around HIV to young gay and bisexual men, specifically around their sexual orientation, because the sex lives of gay and bisexual men, especially young gay and bisexual men, tends to be a lot different to that of their heterosexual counterparts, as in they're probably having sex with more people. This is facilitated by the gay acts, leading on to the next thing. Now, 1 in 30, gay experienced people are 33 times more likely to be involved in selling sex, and sexual exploitation. So if you look at young LGBT care experienced people, especially young gay and bisexual men in the care system, and they're transitioning out of the care system, you can imagine, and I will explain it to you in case you don't kind of get it, but they're probably much more likely to be involved in this, mainly because they're very, very vulnerable. And, if they're not being supported properly, and I've done a video about unregulated accommodation for the 16 pluses, and they're put in some unsupported accommodation, they're 16 or 17, and, they need connection and they need affection, then they're probably going to be doing things that put them at risk. I know this for a fact because I know one young man who was getting a lot of support, and this is from a very well-known charity, and this charity is also the one that was like, well, to mention gay men and bisexual men and HIV is homophobic, and they were like, well, they're not, they're at the same risk of HIV as heterosexuals, and I go back to that little statistic I just gave you, because they're much more at risk of HIV. Or, this young man was selling sex, he was escorting. He had a flat, but he was escorting, because he needed extra money. And I would say he needed basically affection and connection, and that was the main driver, So there's a lot of young male sex workers who grew up in the care system. I used to work for another charity as well, doing sexual health promotion, and they had what they called a rent boy clinic, and that was what the young men chose as the name. So before you touch your bells and say, that's not PC, that was the name they wanted it to be called. And this was 20 years ago as well, so a lot of them, over half of the young men had been in the care system who came along to that clinic, and bear in mind they've just said that 1 in 100 of the population is care experienced, and over 50% of the young men come to that clinic with care experience. So they see, there's a much big discrepancy between the numbers. So basically saying that, the care experienced people are so much more likely to be vulnerable and all that. So that is also an issue, because, and also with young trans women, I would say, who are wanting to have surgery, access to hormones and medications that they may not actually get because of the waiting lists and the times that people who are wanting to confirm their gender are having to wait in the NHS. Then yet I'm pretty sure that some are selling sex, and in order to fund their operations and to fund their hormones and medications. I don't know how much research has been done into this. There are many issues, as you can see, and I could talk at length about all the research. I'm going to do a written blog about this, and I'm going to say all of that in the written blog. So, Pride Month, especially people in the LGBT community, please be aware of your LGBT brothers and sisters who grew up in the care system. Look out for them. If you can, support them, and if you can, find loving, compassionate, empathetic, caring connections with them that are not sexually based. Okay, that's very important, very, very important, because we need to dispel the myth in the younger LGBT population who are care experience that in order to be loved they need to have sex with people, because you don't. You need to stand in your own power and form those connections without sex. And if you are a professional working with LGBT plus care experienced people, be mindful of what I've said. You don't use heteronormative language. Use partner. You don't need to gender the part. You don't need to gender it. You just have to say, do you have a partner at the moment? Are you sexually involved with this partner? How old is this partner? It's really easy. Don't make heteronormative and cisgendered assumptions about the young people in your care, especially the young LGBT plus people. Allow them to be self-determinant in their gender identity and their sexual orientation. Just be mindful of what I've said about sexual exploitation and stuff like that, and just be aware that many of them will not be living in a heteronormative model of the world. That is important, and by heteronormative I mean, you have a couple of partners and you find your partner and you get married to them and you have kids, or you live together and you have kids and you do this and you do that. You need to be aware that, even today a lot of heterosexual people aren't living heteronormative lifestyles. We need to be aware of that. And also one last statistic, and this was from about 7 or 8 years ago, so it's probably changed, if not increased since then. 45% of young people, and this was a big survey I think YouGov did, identified as fluid in regards to their sexual orientation. Fluid, not gay, not straight, not bisexual, fluid. And I've seen this a lot in young people, who say, well, it's about the person, it's not about their gender, it's who the person is in front of me. That's what I'm attracted to. And I think that's a good thing, and that again needs to be supported, that needs to be. Well, I'm confused because you were with a girl last time and now you're with a boy, what's that all about? And you don't say you're bisexual. Again, go back to the young person and what they say they are. That's what's important, that's what needs to be supported, not what you want them to be or what you think they are. Okay, thank you.